Okay, welcome back everybody to my podcast on almost everything as long as it includes philosophy,
Yeah.
right? And we want to talk today about foundation, which includes a lot of philosophy, right?
Indirectly, but yeah, I think so. There are a
Yeah.
lot of questions.
Why do you think indirectly?
Um, there aren't long, ponderous monologues, which is good. It makes it more watchable for a wider audience. But it ends up bringing up, maybe I shouldn't say it indirectly because there are some questions that are brought up quite directly, but I think the implications of those questions are alluded to more than, really heavily
Yeah, heavy
borne down
philosophical
upon. Yeah.
questions.
Yeah, it's kind of
So
taken lightly.
Foundations is a science fiction show on Apple that just came out recently. It's based on the book from Asimov.
Book series,
Book
yeah.
series from Asimov. By the way, I heard that the book just includes monologues and dialogues.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I'm not, just given the era of science fiction it was
Yeah.
written in. I haven't read it, but my father had at least one copy for the Foundation, and bookstores in the 90s in the science fiction section, there'd always be a huge chunk of Foundation books. So I'm not surprised it's being adapted, but I think the way it's being done now is very interesting.
Yeah, it's done in a different way. So, what is the Foundation about? Like, what would you say is the central topic?
There's a question about how much we can use mathematical models or computer science to make decisions about the future, or
Yes.
better decisions about the future.
And we have this empire.
Yeah, it's galaxy-spanning human empire in a galaxy with no other life, or
It's
no
the
other.
Milky Way, right?
I think so, yeah.
Does Earth play a role?
Later in the series, a character mentions a place possibly called Earth and a few real star systems when speculating where humans originated, but at that point in the series, no one knows. In the book series, it was Earth, yeah.
Yeah, it was a bit difficult to follow because the first episode, I believe it introduces 4 different places in just one episode. It introduces the main place of the empire, the central place of the empire,
Yeah,
where
the
the
capital
emperors
planet,
reside,
Trantor, yeah.
Trantor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then 3 other places that I don't remember the names anymore.
Yeah.
I just watched it, but
Okay.
I was just overwhelmed.
I saw it twice about a couple months ago. Trantor was the capital. Terminus was the colony world. And then I don't remember the water planet.
Yeah. So I think what matters is just that the empire is somehow in the center, and then and the empire controls everything, which is the Milky Way with, I think, 80 million planets or something like that.
Something huge. There are a few like fringe kingdoms being described, kingdoms as a planet, but and I think in the books there's more detail about that. But yeah, the idea of a massive galaxy spanning empire that is not obviously in decline, but there are different people who think and believe that things are stagnating and not developing in a healthy way.
How many humans does it include?
I think something like 500 quadrillion.
500 quadrillion.
Yeah.
So a quadrillion,
So 1,000 trillion. So
1,000 trillions.
yeah. So unimaginably.
So these people
large.
could pay the debt of the American government very easily.
Perhaps not. Right. How much GDP are these people producing?
Yes. Do they accept the dollar as the standard currency?
Good question. Something I felt was kind of frustrating. There was a lot that I really liked about the series being an allegory for our contemporary world, which I really like with some science fiction. But later on in the series, there's a character talking about the economy of his planet and what they produce. And I was just like, hasn't that been automated? Right? Like in tens of thousands of years. And yes, there's no more machine intelligence.
There will always be slaves.
Does there need to be? Right? I think
No, there doesn't.
I mean, because I mean, and maybe that's part of the, you know, allegory for our current world, right? Our
A lot of
contemporary
bullshit jobs, yeah.
yeah, and things being transferred to other locations, other markets. Right.
So let's come to the main characters of the show. Let's just go to IMDb. We have a character list here. It's a great profile picture, by the way. So we have Gail Dornick. Who's Gail Dornick?
She's the young mathematics student who is presented as being in the center there, as being the only person capable or with the aptitudes to understand psychohistory other than its originator. So its originator, Harry Seldon.
Yeah,
Okay.
psychohistory.
Psychohistory.
What
yeah.
is psychohistory?
In the book, it's a way of predicting the future using mathematical models, looking at human history and large population trends or patterns.
By the way, what I found interesting in the show, it seems mathematics, like the prediction of the future, is about numbers.
Yeah.
Like they juggle these numbers in their hands somehow.
And they don't explain how the data is being derived or measured or where it's coming from. And I don't think that was the case in the books either. Like in some ways, I think when I was watching it, at first I thought, oh, it's just another science fiction series.
Yes, that's also what I thought.
Right, and
with a lot of talking, by the way.
Well, I thought, really? You thought there was a lot of talking?
I thought so. Now that I rewatched it, I don't think that anymore.
No, like I thought there was a lot of action to it. Like my first thought in like the first 5 minutes were, oh, they're looking for a story to monetize.
Yeah.
Right, and you know, it's not that Marvel Comics have been completely tapped out, but you know.
But you see, it will be the next Game of Thrones. It's supposed to be 9 seasons or something.
Really? Okay. Possibly. I don't know. Like, I don't know. The production values are amazing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the scenes are incredibly beautiful.
Yeah.
But yeah, my first thought was that
and impressive. Like,
they are
impressive. Yeah. The way they visualize the Empire with this kind of huge space station.
There's a grandeur to it.
Yeah. And it was connected by this tube to the planet.
And space elevator.
Yeah, it was a space elevator.
Yeah. There are actually companies looking to do that now. There's one in Japan and I think one in the States.
Yeah, and I'm sure Elon Musk also wants to do it.
Probably.
And Jeff Bezos looking for a yacht that he can
take to the stars.
Yes.
Maybe 5 billion instead of 500 million, something like that. When I first saw it, I thought it was just a cash grab. And the production values, you know, that's you can have high production values with no substance to the story. But I realized very quickly it seemed very deliberately selected because I think like that idea of psychohistory 20 years ago or 10 years ago, it would have seemed fanciful. Whereas now with machine learning and big data, there are questions that people are answering using algorithms that didn't seem answerable. Right? So whether that's AlphaGo or from DeepMind or proteomics being solvable, when those both seemed like problems that were impossible to reduce the complexity of with an algorithm. So for Apple to produce a show about all of the complexity of the universe being identifiable through an algorithm or equation, because they don't use algorithm, but an equation or model that will fit inside like a tetrahedron or whatever the geometric form is on a desk.
you wonder whether Apple is, in a sense, self-ironic. Their
Maybe a little
the
bit
Apple
tongue in cheek.
empire.
I don't think it's, well, watching it, the idea of empire in decline, I think it's very definitely a question of American civilization or Western civilization.
Yeah.
I
mean, it's modeled after the Roman Empire and the Roman decline.
Well, I think the books were.
Yeah.
But
now it just transfers the metaphor or the allegory. Yeah.
Yeah, the allegory to today, because I think Niall Ferguson is a British historian who almost a decade ago was writing about Western civilization and its sort of global preeminence over 500 years, and how now it looks like there are changes, but there's a question: is change and evolution into something else, or does change imply decline? And depending on who you talk, you'll get different answers, no matter where people are, because there are Americans arguing that, there are people here in China arguing that civilization in decline. Had one student say that in an essay about the United States being in decline, and I thought, that's interesting, and there are definitely problems that exist there. But if you look at, the wealth gap between the United States and China, over the pandemic, it's actually grown in the favor of the States, right? Where they've experienced more total growth.
I remember, because you mentioned that decline, and I remember my father, a trained Marxist in the GDR. He was, since my childhood, he was always giving the state only 5 more years.
Oh, okay,
like the end of civilization is always 5 years away.
A generation away.
I'm reminded of my father when we talk about this person here on the right.
Okay.
Who is it?
Seldon, Harry Seldon.
Harry Seldon,
Yeah, the mathematician, or they never say he's a psychologist, I don't think, but the person who originates psychohistory, this discipline that only he and Gail Dornick can understand. So I think it's interesting that there's also a question about mastery of subjects that's brought up, because we're in a society now where we have more access to information than we've ever had. And fields have grown so large that, quote unquote, experts in a field, whether that's, because of academic research or experience, are in a situation where they're always having to learn about the field. Right? Like, mastery is continuous, and it always has been. But, in medieval Florence, you could become a doctor and there was a totality of that body of knowledge, right? And some people might try to expand upon that, but there was more or less, at least my impression of this, I'm not a historian, so I could be wrong, but my impression was there's an idea of what it was to become, a doctor or an accountant or an engineer, and that the field wasn't in flux. Whereas now we have so much information, you still have accountants and engineers and teachers and doctors and different professions, and a lot of them require constant training, constant growth. But you also have a lot of people who listen to a news article 5 or 6 times, or 5 or 6 articles on a topic or discussions on a topic, and then they feel like an expert. Right? Like there's a cult
that's interesting.
There's a cult of the amateur where, 3 months into the pandemic, everyone knew about epidemiology, or was an expert in epidemiology, and you had to share, what Nietzsche called.
Is that so much different from former times? I mean, we had more peasants and more illiterate people who couldn't deal with these intellectual topics, and then let's say
or just didn't have the opportunity.
They
didn't have the exposure.
They didn't have the exposure.
Yeah.
And then the professors seemed to be so far removed that they could describe them as experts in a specific field who were like magicians of knowledge. But I think also back then it was already clear in a philosophical sense that you learn, but you basically learn how much more there is still
Is
to
to learn.
learn.
Yeah.
And the field of physics at the time of Maxwell, let's say that, before it was revolutionized, even though Max Planck learned when he went to school that there is not much more to discover in physics, right?
It's almost a closed book. Yeah.
Yeah, in a sense, but towards the inside, there was so much to do and so much to know, right?
Yeah.
It was like from the outside, it seemed to be closed. So I'm not entirely sure, but about the claim that back then we could have had experts who knew everything.
No, but I'm not suggesting that they knew everything, but it was, I think, easier to reach the limit of what a profession was. Right? Like that, the totality of that body of knowledge was demonstrably less.
Let's say it that way, because we don't want to talk around that way. Or maybe that's making up another topic. But I think the niche for power, right, that you could obtain with your profession was easier manageable.
I don't know. Perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps, I think. Yeah.
Because you could shield yourself.
Yeah.
More easily.
Well, knowledge wasn't transferred as much.
Yeah.
Right. So now,
now you get challenged.
Yeah. There has to be more defense. And I think depending on where that's coming from, there can be debate and usually an opportunity for someone asking questions to learn more. But there's also a lot of misinformation and lack of grounding in basic science sometimes, but also, our methods of inquiry, how it is that we understand what we widely believe that we know or think that we know. When I was an undergraduate, I took a couple of courses in epistemology, but I remember at the end of one course, there was a chemistry student who had taken it as his arts elective. And he'd thanked the professor because he said, as I've been studying chemistry for the last 2-3 years, we're given all of these and we learn a little bit about the scientific method, but we didn't learn how we originated the scientific method and how we developed a grounding for that knowledge.
Which we should do in philosophy, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is related, like that's a longer excursus on like a theory of knowledge, and I think it relates to foundation. So how does it relate to foundation?
Well, because there's a question, and this may be a bit of a spoiler, but later in the series, partway through, the Emperor has exiled Seldon's followers and asks a group of royal statisticians what they've made of the calculations. And they sort of prevaricate and say, oh, well, it's juggling, it's,
juggling numbers.
Yeah, it's nothing, it's reading tarot cards, it's not real science. And the Emperor, sees that that's a lie. And he's like, you've had 40 years and you've done nothing. Right, like 40 years, the best statisticians in the empire, and you haven't understood what this one person and his follower, student understood. And so I think on one hand it brings up like limits of what we can do with things like predictive analytics, right? Because I feel like
let's keep that for a second.
Sure.
We say that in a second. I just want to finish that we talk about the characters.
And
like a bit about the story, so that we really have a clear picture.
Right.
And then we can dive into these topics. So I think in this picture, which you don't see on the podcast, we see the basic conflict, right? I think, like, as far as I understand from the first episode,
there are two conflicting worldviews and someone undecided in between them. Right.
So we have Harry Seldon, the mathematician, who says the end is near, and I know it.
Yes.
I cannot prove it because you're all too dumb.
Yeah.
That's right?
Yeah.
And then we have on the left the Emperor. Do you want to say something about? I found the figure of the Emperor really, like, I found that compelling. It makes the show great. I think that's an element that makes the show really great. So what is it about the Emperor?
I think The emperor is really useful because he embodies the idea of the empire, right? He's able to stand in for that civilization, because if it was just Harry Seldon and a committee, right, or a tribunal or whatever else, it would just be this, faceless mass of people. Whereas the questions about the sustainability of the empire have to be dealt with or manifest through this character, through this personality. So it's easy to, relate to that emotionally.
Mhm.
And where you said that Selden thought that the future could be predicted and the end is near, the emperor is saying, no, our royal reign, has maintained things
12,000 years.
by force of will. 500 or 400 later in the
But
that
the
their
empire is
lineage.
12,000 years?
Yeah, the empire is something like 12,000, but his lineage,
Yeah.
like the clones, have only been like 400 or
clones.
500. Yeah. Yeah, so different royal reign.
So if you enjoyed that, then like, subscribe, comment. I feel like a bit self-conscious, especially since I already say it the third time. Do all the stuff you're supposed to do and do it now. Don't procrastinate. Never procrastinate.
Ever. With
Never
anything.
ever procrastinate. Do your math homework.
Do
Predict the
dishes.
future.
Do the dishes.
Do the dishes. You can listen to the whole show. Do the dishes. So you can listen to the whole show on my podcast, on my blog. It's all in the description. Or if you listen to the podcast, you can watch the video snippets with the nice pictures that we selected very carefully on YouTube. Also the link in the description. Well, you know the stuff. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Have a nice night and bye-bye.